Hello, this is Sean Williams, Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services at Eaton RISA. I'm briefly going to go over this PowerPoint that was introduced with all central office members across all local school districts in Eaton County on November 6th. The purpose of this slide deck is to introduce the whole child in MTSS within the new school improvement process that is coming our way in the spring of 2021. The first slide is really just a fun slide that really kind of depicts the idea that sometimes things happen and not everybody awares how they happen, to set up the idea that as we move towards this whole child model that is being is dictated in a way from the state to us, that we have a lot of components already in place in our district and in our schools. We might not always know how they occur and who's responsible, but they do occur to help alleviate that anxiety that we already do have a lot of capacity in our schools to support the whole child. We might need to do a little bit more coordination and build some systems, but we do have a lot of tools in place. And the effort is here with this slide deck is to introduce but also reduce the anxiety that even though there's a lot of changes coming, we're not rethinking completely how we run our schools. So the first slide that gets into the meat of things is really identifying the purpose. Again, we're really trying to tackle this as a collaborative activity involving as many school level folks as we can. As we go towards the new MICIP, which is the Michigan Continuous Improvement Process, which replaces the current process we have through Advanced Ed. And really this year is a capacity building year, building that knowledge, and trying not to overwhelm our school staff by assigning tasks already to implement the new model. We're really learning in this year. And then the outcomes really is just seeing how we all fit within our school systems, within the process as we move forward. So the first activity is really to have a discussion with staff about how are they already involved in school improvement process. Are they part of the school leadership team? Do they, have a component within the school improvement plan that they are responsible for? Just really an informal conversation. The next slide gets into the meat of things, and these slides that are more content heavy, there are quite a bit of detailed notes in the note pane within the slide deck to help give you some background knowledge and some talking points. I'll give you a few talking points for each slide as we move forward in this presentation. So the first slide that really gets into this is this timeline. The timeline's split into two different components. On the top side, we really have our academic trajectory that we've had over the past, almost 20 years now. And then on the bottom side, we have the whole child components, which include like health, physical activity, and so on. They really have operated independent of each other, and it isn't until recently with the ESSA Act that we combined the two efforts into one. And so on the top we have No Child Left Behind, of course, which started really the standards movement as we know it. Obviously that didn't get off to the start we had hoped. So MTSS came along to help kind of bolster and create that opportunity for differentiation and scaffold instruction. And then on the bottom side, we had the old coordinated school health model that really focused on flowing federal and state funds to promote health and wellness amongst students. And eventually that was updated in 2014 to the current model, which with the help of ASCD, the CDC released the WISC, which is the whole school, whole community, and whole child model. This model then was used as a reference for ESSA Act and included the components of whole child within the ESSA Act. And so now we have new combined expectations of both serving both the academics and the whole child. Yes, that was 2015. You're just now maybe hearing about this. Part of that is because the way the state has tackled rolling it out, they really kind of released the how this was going to look like in Michigan with the top 10 and 10 in 2017, and really kind of set out more of the compliance pieces of it with a timeline for developing a new school improvement process, which we now know as the MICIP. And they altered the just slightly the decision making process that you're used to seeing to now have more comprehensive areas within it with a whole child in the middle, and but also really teasing out the idea of implementation and monitoring is a significant part of school improvement. So that kind of wraps that slide up. The next slide is the actual timeline. What's critical here is to know that although 2021 seems far off, we're really looking at next spring. So we really just have from now to the end of the school year to really tackle understanding what whole child is and some of the components as they come out of the MICIP. But I think it's also important to try to not stress folks out thinking that this means they're going to have to completely change what they've done in the past. What it means is that we're going to have to modify and alter some of the things we've done in the past, but we're not really recreating the wheel. And the reason we're not recreating the wheel is because we've been fairly successful as a county in implementing MTSS. So we have this vehicle that's built that facilitates school improvement, and now we just need to infuse these whole child components into school improvement and MTSS, so it's all blended into one. And so when you look at this slide, we have, of course, the new process identified by MDE, and we go over to the assess needs component that we've always done already. When we think about MTSS and trying to identify what the needs of our students are using 4 different types of data, which are those multiple measure pieces, which is that graphic, and then of course within the MTSS model. So now we're literally just adding the whole child model into this. So this would mean that maybe we're not just tackling literacy, maybe that isn't the problem that we're experiencing in a classroom or in our building. Maybe it's something to do with the whole child. And in this worked example, it says students are disengaged, tired, and oppositional. And so when we did the needs assessment, we identified these priorities, which are that students need access to healthy snacks and meals. And we also, with our staff, need to increase awareness around trauma-informed practices. And then, of course, just like we would with any academic issue, we would tier that out. What are we going to do for all kids? What are we going to do for some kids? And what are we going to do for the few that really need that intense support? And then from that, we're able to develop the needs. What do we need to actually make this happen? What's interesting about the model is that it goes from needs to plans to funds. And historically, schools sometimes start out with, well, this is the money we have, what can we do with it? The state's really encouraging us to think of it more on, this is what our kids need, let's figure out how we fund it. And that's why it's really critical that we do include a lot of different stakeholders in the process. So we're working with our business office from the beginning, so they know what funds to look for, understand the different flexibility of the funds, and communicate those back to the building. It's really more of a collaborative effort we're trying to build here. And that's why this initial meeting that we had at Eaton Risa with the local central office leadership included curriculum directors, special ed directors, superintendents, business directors, technology directors, because everyone really needs to be on the same page to make this work. The next slide then is more following up that worked example that shows these different funding streams and how they could influence the plan that was developed in response to the priorities, which in this worked example is all staff will be responsive to the needs of students, students will have more access to healthy snacks and meals, and staff will ensure students have time to eat. And so with those goals, you would then figure out what are the steps or action steps that are going to be needed to fulfill those. And most often they're going to require some form of professional development, materials, resources, what have you, personnel. And so here are your funding sources that you could access to make that happen. The next slide just really just has this caution in here. As we go into the whole child supports and we're trying to build student efficacy, their ability to problem solve, and how sometimes that's hindered by traumatic experiences. If we use the inappropriate strategy, we could actually cause harm. That's a little bit different than literacy. Literacy can impact the ability to, excel in literacy, whereas if you use a strategy, say a social emotional learning strategy, that was really not appropriate, or you didn't deliver it in an appropriate way where students actually experience trauma from the strategy, if that makes sense. So in other words, we could actually cause harm because we use the wrong strategy in dealing with these social emotional issues. And so that's why it's really important, as we talked about having all these stakeholders involved, that we have different folks involved that can help inform what best practices should be. So then after that, we have a conversation about, where do you specifically in your role fit within the school improvement process? And so the next slide actually has the previous slide grayed out so we can emphasize what roles may fit into these different components. And so, if I wanted to start with the top, maybe my role, I'm a classroom teacher and I'm on the building leadership team or school leadership team, and I'm going to be one of the folks that helps collect and analyze data. And so maybe I'm going to put myself in here. Or maybe I'm an interventionist or a coach, and I'm responsible for the tiered model within my building. And so maybe I'm going to put my name in here. I somebody that is managing the budget. I work in the business office, or I'm the grants person. They're going to put themselves over here. And then because this really is a technologically based process, in other words, that most of the data and most of the reporting is going to be done online, we need to make sure that all those components are in place. And so we're looking at some of our tech folks here, and also might be some systems coaches too. Who's going to be responsible to make sure this process stays on target and is executed on the timelines that is established by the leadership team or the district. And so you could have a couple different roles really within this box. The next slide is basically a video that was developed by ASCD, just a real nice boilerplate video to the nutshell of how this really is going to work and why the model was developed. The next one kind of just is designed to develop that sense of urgency, and there's some notes of course in the bottom, but the reality is we've all known for a long time that a big part of what's affecting student achievement are things beyond our control. What the SSA Act and the whole child model is pushing us to do is really consider how could we affect affect student achievement through improving these whole child factors by addressing them, by supporting students, or sometimes it's maybe not us doing the addressing, it's connecting them to the right community organizations for the additional supports. So next is the actual whole child model or WIS model, which is designed a little bit differently than we are used to seeing a lot of models. This model operates from the outside in. In other words, it really wants folks to think about the community first and all the resources that we have available and the people and how our collective effort can really make a difference in a student's life. And then think about the different components that affect students' life, so that in the blue are 10 different components that affect students' overall well-being and thus achievement. A lot where in leadership where folks play a role is in this white area, where we're really trying to take the responsibilities that are being laid upon us from the state or our district or the feds, the policies and practices that come along with all that, and try to mold it into something that really positively affects students in a way that provides safety, that they're engaged, supported, challenged, and are healthy. So the next few slides really goes into breaking each one of those areas of the whole child model down. As you can see, again, at each slide there's a plethora of notes and talking points, but for the most part it is summarized on the slides. So we start with the outside and that community piece, and how school is a hub and a reflection of the community. There's a couple different things about the history and how it's been difficult to engage the community in past efforts through schools, and this is a new opportunity maybe from the beginning have community input. And then it goes into the 10 different components, which a lot of them you're going to be familiar with. The ones that are a little bit newer, in the sense that we typically haven't addressed them in school improvement planning, would definitely be the employee wellness, and then really linking in purposefully the counseling, the psychological services, and lastly the health services piece like school nurse, community mental health, and so on. The rest of them are components that you have had in some degree within your school, but again, not maybe everybody understands how those supports occurred. And they probably occurred, in a vacuum with some students and maybe weren't always accessible to everyone. Then the next slide, the white ring, gets into those coordinating the policies and really that coordination piece. And as we become more aware of these different whole child pieces and we try to blend them into our MTSS system, we're going to run into the same issues we ran into MTSS, where we're going to have some duplication, or maybe we haven't had a great selection process in the systems that we've had. And so, we're going to really have to run through that entire decision-making process as described in those previous slides with whole child supports, as we have historically done with MTSS supports. Then we have the inner ring, which are the 5 tenets: the health, safety, engage, support, and challenge, which are overall the things that are going to make the biggest difference in students' lives. So it's really blending those 10 components and funneling them specifically to these areas or these tenets that are going to really impact students' lives and therefore achievement. And then just kind of bringing that model all back together again, since we exploded it and talked about it in different components. And so then the next activity, and feel free to alter these questions however you want, is to really start generating that conversation. So if we're going to do this correctly, this effort around whole child, what's the kind of data we're going to need to do this? What types of resources will we need to address or align and meet the needs of students? What are the training needs of our school systems and to implement whole child supports? And what does our district team or our school team need to do to support each other with the implementation of MICIP? And just to reiterate, MICIP is a district level school improvement process where the schools are subsets of the district process. So it's really led by the district in order to make sure that systems are developed, resources and personnel supports and all these different things then are more strategically placed and coordinated. So it's a little bit different process than what we've done in the past with the advanced ed process. But for the purpose here of this activity is we're really not trying to find all solutions. We're just trying to generate some ideas. And what we're hoping is that that staff realizes that we do already have a lot of data points that we could use. We might need to get some gap filling data, but we do have some capacity. We do have some resources, maybe not aligned as we would like them, but we do have resources. There's folks in the building that have expertise and training already in some of these areas. Maybe it's we don't have a social worker on our school improvement team. We need to have a social worker in this case, or somebody else with that level of expertise in that area if that's where we identify as a need. So it's really rethinking, how can we move things around a little bit to make this more of a unified system. The next slide then goes to really having people share, and when we think about where am I going to fall in supporting the MICIP, or what could I do? Because what you're going to find is people might have just from the presentation come up with some ideas of how they could actually support through some of the things they're already doing and contribute to the group. And again, because traditionally we've been so focused on academics, most likely the teams that have been developing and executing the school improvement plan are really part of the team now that would be a part of this new process. You're also going to need some folks that have the whole child background and that understanding to contribute to the team. So when we identify problems of practice, we have all those different people at the table that might be able to say, well, it could be a literacy issue, but also, there might be some other issue like a nutrition issue that's occurring or what have you. And so you can kind of see how maybe it's a mental health issue, but having those folks at the table might help zero down quicker and more efficiently on the actual problems. And then this slide really is just kind of to reiterate, this is going to be a stretch for some teachers. This is not why they got into teaching. A lot of folks was to support the whole child. It really was around the academics. But it's a good point to make that when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. We're so focused sometimes on students fitting into our model. We often don't think about maybe our model needs to change to facilitate the learning of students more often. And so, that's just one of those philosophical shifts that are embedded in this process. And then the remainder of the slides are essentially handouts that you can use to help facilitate the presentation, anywhere from this one pager of about the MICIP to a breakdown of each of the components within the whole child model, including the 5 tenets, the outer ring for the 10 components, and which are defined, and then of course, the policy ring and the community portions. I also included a link to the CDC Healthy Schools. This is the little dashboard. If you go there, it's a great resource to push out to staff because they can go through on their own and learn more. And it's highly interactive, and they might find components that they want to discuss themselves as a grade level teams or school teams. So it is a good resource to have that supports all of this. And then lastly, this was basically when we did the presentation on November 6th. This was basically the guiding questions that you saw in a couple of the slides. It's a place where people could actually write it down as they got to that activity. So I can't emphasize enough that if you have any questions, please get a hold of me or any of our folks in instructional services. We're really all on the same page on this, and we want to help. We want to make sure that this year is really positive as teachers begin to build their capacity and really reduce that stress because we are proficient at MTSS, or at least working our way towards proficiency. We have this system built that can easily accommodate the inclusion of whole child efforts. Thank you. and have a great day.